Divers and people who spend a lot of time underwater, what's the most unexplainable thing you've seen while in the depths? I'm a commercial diver and was once on the job cleaning a potable water reservoir. I'd been in other reservoirs before, but this was by far the biggest, at 40 by 80 meters. To get in, you had to open a hatch in the ground. The whole reservoir was underground and climb down a ladder. The hatch was in a corner, so when you were in the far corner of the reservoir, it was completely pitch black, and you just had to hope your light didn't go out. I was about halfway through a 3-hour drive when the batteries in my torch started going flat. I watched the beam get narrower and dimmer until it cut out completely. It's not a huge problem if you lose light, as you can just follow your umbilical back to the hatch. Just as I started walking back, some obnoxiously loud banging started somewhere in the reservoir. I was the only diver in there, so it both confused and scared the hell out of me. Needless to say, I ran back to the hatch as fast as I could. I ended up getting my torch changed out and doing another hour in the water, but I didn't hear the noise again. I still have no idea what it was, but the combination of my torch going out and loud banging coming from somewhere gave me a hell of a fright. The best explanation I can think of is that the guys on the surface were trying to mess with me. I definitely wouldn't put it past them. I'm not a believer in supernatural stuff, but the situation definitely freaked me out. Kind of like how you get scared by a horror movie even though you know it's not real. But still, I am not sure. Wait, what? This dude went back? What was he thinking? Story 2. It was not unexplainable, but gave me a bit of a fright. I worked as a commercial diver for about 7 years in the UK, and I also did some work in Europe. I was working in Orkney, north of Scotland, in the fish farms. One time I swam down one of the bigger nets off Russia and it was very dark and overgrown, and I could see some weird shapes lying as I descended. There were a few more fish carcasses than usual, maybe 100 or so, but underneath them were 3 seal carcasses, big ones. It was hard to make out because they were covered in fish, and that's when I looked up and saw a 4-foot tear in the side of the net. I was only a novice at this point. Fish farm work is generally the best way to start a diving career. It doesn't pay the best, but you get plenty of minutes logged, which helps for experience. I told the supervisor who said to get out right away. They sent one of the more experienced lads in after me, and he fixed the hole sharply and then rigged the seals up to be lifted out. It turns out the seals had been attacked by an orca, and somehow got through the net in a panic. Orcas are quite common up in Orkney and are the only animal we were told you had to get out of the water for if seen. Only one of the seals had a bite mark. The other 2 got caught in the net. Not supernatural or anything, but I remember a significant shiver running down my spine that day. So why orcas? I was told by one of the marine environment lads who used to regularly come out on the boats with us that it's a precautionary thing. Wearing black neoprene and fins, you may be mistaken for a seal and become breakfast. To be fair, it's a precaution I was very happy to go along with. We don't get great whites or tiger sharks up there, but I'd imagine in South Africa, India, Australia, etc., there would be similar rules. Story 3. I personally dive, but this account is from my grandfather, who's a dive master. He and my grandma chose Cancun for a vacation, both being experienced dive masters. With their expertise, the dive group leader enlisted their help in assisting new divers with tasks like clearing ears or adjusting weight belts. During one dive, my grandfather was paired with a young woman in her 20s who had just received her diver certification. The plan was to explore a drop-off where the reef transitions into a deep cliff. For those unfamiliar, a drop-off takes you from a 40-foot reef to a cliff with an unknown depth. As they swam over the reef, the group decided to venture to the cliff's edge during the final part of the dive. The young diver, certified for a maximum depth of 60 feet, suddenly started descending rapidly down the wall. 50, 60, 70, and 80 feet, and my grandfather, along with a dive leader, attempted to grab and stop her. Despite their efforts, she continually plummeted to 120 feet, the limit dictated by their air supply. Helplessly, they watched as she descended even further until she vanished from sight. She never resurfaced, leaving the dive group shaken, especially my grandfather. I felt a profound sense of responsibility for not preventing her descent in time. The mystery of why she chose to dive beyond her limits lingered, casting a somber mood over the entire group. Story 4. The story isn't really mine, but from a friend of mine who does night dives. Here on the Brazilian coast, there's a fish that resembles a shark, but it's considerably smaller, called cacao. You have to hunt these at night because they're sort of nasty in the open, but easier to target when they're coves. So my friend, let's call him Regis, is about 1 kilometer from the coast, diving near a reef. This thing is massive, and you have to go really deep to get to the slope with the coves. He's descending with a partner using cylinders for oxygen and armed with a harpoon gun, the kind that shoots the harpoon and is reloadable, which is kind of heavy, making movement a tad slower. It's super dark in the deep during the night, and much light will alert the fish they're hunting, so they have to use flashlights that are weaker. Regis said he had a feeling while descending that everything was off. The smaller fish were absent, there were no turtles, and the water was murkier than usual. His partner stays back with a flashlight and he goes closer to the reef. Regis searches for the coves but can't find any with the cacao he wants, so it takes kind of a while. At a certain point, he feels a shift in the water, like something big is swimming near him, just as the weak light from his partner waves frantically and goes off. He doesn't know what to expect and goes into fight or flight mode, except he can't ascend too fast. He then tries to stay at the same level, but he has his back to the reef now. Then he cocks the gun with a harpoon and waits. He waits and waits, but he doesn't see anything in the murky night seawater, not even his partner's light. That had to mean one of two things. Either his partner ran out of batteries or he saw something and didn't want to attract its attention. Regis finally decided to start ascending very slowly. The weird feeling he had got worse and turned into chills. As he's going up, he feels that same shift again and does not hesitate to harpoon whatever it was, but misses. He said he had never seen something so big underwater and it swam fast. As Regis couldn't see much in the dark, he couldn't make out a proper shape, but he saw that the thing went deeper near the reef, so he tries to go up as fast as possible and makes out to the boat, where his partner helps him up. It turns out his partner warned him about it with a light because he saw something abnormally big, swimming at a dangerous distance but couldn't get to him because he felt watched by the thing. They both call it the blackfish since they can't really see what it is. It's said to be as big as a man, about 1.7 meters. Regis lost the harpoon in the end. Both of them still dive at night. It's a no-no for me, though. Also, always dive in groups, guys. If something happens, you gotta have someone to have your back. Never know. Story 5. I was told a story once by a Maori language teacher of mine during my time at high school. We didn't learn much Maori. We just listened to stories. A dam in Waikato, New Zealand, had begun to have visible cracks in the concrete on the outside part of the dam, and some drivers were organized to dive down and check the inside submerged part of the dam for damage on that side. While they were down there was the usual debris you would find behind a man-made wall, which prevents the water from flowing as it would normally do if there wasn't a dam there. It turns out what they thought were large logs were in fact huge eels that had gone to the size of logs due to being prevented from migrating to the sea, where they breed and perish. So instead of being prevented from doing their natural life duties, they just get larger and larger. That would be creepy to see eels deep down in the water just floating around. Story 6. Two biggest. My buddy was taking pictures. He wanted me surrounded by a school of fish, so I started tossing out small pieces of hot dog. I was immediately surrounded by so many perch that I couldn't see out. All of a sudden, a largemouth bass snagged one of the pieces of hot dog that was maybe 6 inches from my face. My mask blocked his approach. It scared the crap out of me. The second one was a night dive in very silty water. Visibility was less than 3 feet. Lowest I mark if I can't see my outstretched arm. It is greater than 3 feet. We were near a flooded structure, maybe an old water tank, at about 35 feet. Something was flashing in our lights. Suddenly, I was covered in something I couldn't see my light reflecting back. I pull it off my face, but it is still black and I can feel it touching the top of my head. I try over and over to free myself, but I don't feel caught, just covered. Finally, it got clear. It was a large plastic trash bag. Keep your trash out of the water, please. Story 7. Rescue and recovery diver here. Every time I've recovered a drowning victim, I get the creeps. Unfortunately, a lot of people are under the impression that every underwater environment is like the movies and there's absolute clarity. That's rarely the case. One evening, I got called for someone who jumped from a bridge. She likely survived the fall and entry. We have a morbid term of what happened to her upon hitting the water. Plugged. I found her with a surprising amount of visibility in relatively shallow water. She was stuck in the mud just below her knees, and you could see the fear locked into her eyes. There's nothing peaceful about ending everything by jumping off a bridge. Man, that is one of the most disturbing things I've read so far. Story 8. You can dive into man-made lakes and check out what's left of old, flooded homes and communities. It's pretty dark and spooky down there no matter what, especially when you think of all the big fish swimming around that are barely silhouettes until they're close. My buddy likes to dive in lakes. He said the creepiest thing by far is finding cemeteries 100 feet or more beneath the water in the dark, eerie quiet. I asked him about big fish. He said there are definitely things down there bigger than he expected, 4 or 5 feet. They're attracted to the lights and noise but watch from a distance, which is nonetheless disconcerting. Just dark 2D shapes drifting nearby. None of the monsters other folks are bringing up, though. Story 9. I live in South Carolina, and we have a lake named Lake Murray. Both of my parents were scuba divers growing up, and I was also one as a young adult. I used to dive in Lake Murray and saw underwater cemeteries, old churches, shot down war bombers, and huge catfish. This is part of the reason I don't even get into swimming pools anymore. Terrifying. I was also snorkeling in the Bahamas when I was young and kept trying to play with this little baby swordfish, who would dart a few feet away from me, leading me further and further from shore. Then I noticed a large gray object heading straight for me, pretty far away but easy enough to see in crystal clear water. It was about a 10 to 12 feet tiger shark. I panicked, turned around, and hauled myself back to shore, convinced the whole time my little legs kicking like hell were going to get bitten. I barely made it back. The shark was right there, maybe 30 to 50 feet from shore as I got on land. To this day, I'm convinced the baby swordfish and tiger shark had some kind of deal. I'll never swim again. That ending with a baby swordfish and tiger shark in cahoots to bait this dude was like something out of some sort of 1800s children's story. If you love creepy discoveries, then you're going to love my other videos about creepy stuff. So hit the like button and subscribe to my channel now. Story 10. I dive myself, but heard the story from a Garda diver. In 2010, a man took a test drive in a car with a salesman, and in an attempt to end his life, he drove the car off the pier into the sea and drowned. The salesman managed to escape by breaking the window and swimming to the surface. The divers were dispatched to retrieve the other man, simply by working in marinas at the time. I was able to be part of the conversation with the diver in question. When he got to the car, he said the man was still facing forward, hands on the steering wheel. He'd been there a couple of hours now, and where it got creepy was when the diver opened the driver's door, which, combined with the smashed window, caused the currents to flow through the car and the man's head turned around slowly to face the diver. Man, that was a selfish way to go. Story 11. When living off the coast, some buddies and I would take regular fishing trips out to the oil rigs. We would always have some lines out and a few would dive down and try to spear some mangrove snapper or cobia. Once, while I and two others were diving down and checking out the structure, we decided we needed to move due to a lack of life around the rig. We all got back in the boat, and as one of my buddies was reeling in a line, we had a red snapper baited on. An easily 8 to 10 feet tiger shark starts chewing on it right behind the prop. The idea that a massive animal was in the water so close to me and two of my friends, but no one saw it, is terrifying. I bet he was watching us the whole time. Story 12. I've had plenty of run-ins with barracudas. They're almost invisible in the water until they get close enough. I'd say two of the scariest experiences I've had were on the same trip. I was snorkeling in some shallows and was looking along a wall looking for octopus or any kind of colorful fish, and I looked up and was face to face with two of them. I lifted my spear to defend myself, and this must have scared them off. The second one, we were swimming near some kind of old structure and there was a barracuda dwelling in the shadow of the structure. We scared it off and proceeded to swim around to jump off the structure. A few of us, including myself, were diving down and looking at the coral around the structure's supports, and that same barracuda came back. But next to it was a massive silhouette. It was bigger than me and the same shape as a cuda. I'm pretty sure after that most of us noped out. Story 13. An old World War II ammunition ship off the south coast of England was full of brass-topped shells. Most had been taken by divers over the years, and it was now very rare to see them, apart from a pile in one corner of the ship. This pile of shiny brass metal was miraculously untouched and remarkably clean after spending years underwater, and you only found out why if you swam near it. Out of the murky darkness, the largest eel I've ever seen snakes forward. Without exaggeration, this thing had a head the same size as a horse's head, full of jagged teeth. I could not see the body as it looped into the dark and deeper into the ship. No one got near those shells. It turns out that for years, this thing had been guarding the shiny brass shells, slithering over them and making them shine. We found out at the bar later that he was famous in the area and many people went to the wreck just to see him. I have no idea why this giant creature was guarding them like a dragon in its hoard, but some say eels are like magpies and are attracted to shiny things. It could be that the shiny shells attracted other fish that the eel ate. It was effectively guarding a giant lure. Story 14. This isn't my story, but my dad's. So when he was in graduate school, he did some field studies classes, some of which involved diving in Monterey Bay. One day he was diving and counting something off of the Santa Cruz Pier, and he found a shopping cart with the bricks and cinder blocks, and a chain attached to the handle. He naturally followed the chain and found a foot wrapped in the chain. His friends had seen similar things too. Also not mine, but my dad's friend. He says he was on a shelf counting mussels when he felt something tap his tank, and he looked around and didn't see anything. He figured it was a seal because they like to play. When he was nudged again, he saw it was a great white. He says he thought to himself, if it gets me, it gets me. I can't outswim it. Now I don't know if he was actually that chill. I sure wouldn't be, but that's how he tells it. Story 15. When I used to surf, I spent a good deal of time underwater, whether intentionally or not. One day I went out on an absolutely massive surf. For me, it was 10 foot solid all day. Bigger sets, serious stuff. And it was a very dark, overcast winter's day. And raining. You couldn't see anything above the water, let alone below. At this place, the bigger it gets, the further out on the rock shelf it breaks. So I was at least 200 meters from shore when, out of the gloom, towered by an absolutely massive set. Enormous. As big as I'd ever encountered. There were only a handful of other guys out there. The wave was mine. At this point, I wasn't scared at all. No. I wanted to get the biggest wave of my life, so I tried. I got onto it, but I just messed up the position of my feet ever so slightly. There was no chance of pulling out, so I tried to go with it. And that was when it happened. The scariest water-based experience I've ever had. I fell off, and this thing just took me to town. It lifted me up and over the falls. I thought I was okay, but no. It was just beginning. It just kept pushing me down further and further. My ears hurt badly. It was completely dark and cold, even in a wetsuit. I came to rest on what seemed to be a very large, smooth rock. I could feel it with my fingers while I was pinned firmly to it. I was held there for what seemed like an eternity, maybe 10 seconds, but then I could sense with my feet a ferocious current that seemed to stop at the edge of the rock. It was trying to pull me over the ledge and down. I could hear it. At this point, I was panicking. Seriously. I can't quite remember how I escaped. I've rarely been that scared all my life. I made it to the surface. I really thought I was going to pass out. I can't remember much more, but I must have paddled in so fast that other people noticed. They came to see what the matter was. I just sat on the beach. I could not even talk. I'm getting the heebie-jeebies even reading my own recollection. Story 16. I've done many dives. The strangest thing I ever saw was a large deep freezer with a heavy industrial chain wrapped around multiple times with about 5 cinder blocks attached. It was very, very rusted, and the deep freezer itself had to have been 30 plus years old, probably more. This was about 90 feet deep, just over Vancouver Island, Canada. The situation gave me and the other divers the creeps. We logged the GPS and depth coordinates and notified the police. We were able to find out what was inside since one of the divers had friends with the local police. 10 porcelain dolls. It sounds like the beginning of a horror movie where the thing should have stayed sealed. Story 17. When I was a kid, we used to go to a place during the summer holidays that had some very nice beaches and, in particular, an estuary with a very wide river mouth. One summer, there was a king tide where enough of the water emptied out of the river into the ocean that you could snorkel quite easily from one side of the river mouth to the other side as it goes so shallow that it was only a meter or so deep at the deepest part. One day, I decided to snorkel across from one beach to the one on the other side of the river, and about halfway across, where the depth of the bottom was maybe half a meter, I was swimming along the surface, looking down with my mask and snorkel on, and a massive stingray passed directly underneath me. This thing was easily 2 meters across, covered in white scars and missing its tail. I just froze in the water and it felt like my heart stopped. If I had let my breath out, I would have dropped in the water low enough that I would have landed on it. It was so close. I wasn't in any danger, but having a massive creature appear so unexpectedly, so close up, was absolutely terrifying. I hope you enjoyed the video, and if you made it this far, I'm sure you'll also enjoy hikers. What's the scariest thing you saw in the forest? Story 4 will make you think twice about walking alone at night. See you in that video.